All right, as we have a subtropical storm hitting down here in Florida, David and I have finally caught us the big kahuna. It's Stanley Kubrick. We're going to be talking about A Clockwork Orange today, 1971. A masterpiece, an obvious masterpiece. My first introduction to this movie, I remember I was between the ages of 8 and 10 years old, and this was like a movie that I was forbidden to watch. I didn't know anything about it other than I was just forbidden to watch it. It has a notorious legend. And I remember sneaking over to my friend's house, sneaking into his older brother's room and watching this movie and being terrified by it at that early age. Obviously, as I've grown, I've recognized the sheer brilliance, the genius that is Kubrick. Probably the most consummately genius director that ever lived. He's one of the finest artists who ever lived, which is also one of the reasons why I haven't done anything about him on my channel yet, because he's incredibly intimidating. If you watch any other videos where they attempt to do a deep dive into any one of Kubrick's post-2001 films, or if you read any sort of scholarly even article or essay trying to dissect his films, you'll find that they're really shooting in the dark, because Kubrick, his films were so multifaceted and multi-layered and so complicated, sophisticated, that it just seems like everyone's just it's just grasping at straws, just being really poor with their analysis. And hopefully we won't be that way. We chose A Clockwork Orange because we feel that the themes are pretty important to our current society. So if we're going to discuss a Kubrick movie, and if we are going to run the chance of being incorrect, I'd rather be incorrect in the name of a greater good than for pseudo-intellectualism. So let's just jump into A Clockwork Orange. David, take it away.
So there's a quote paralleled in another movie, The Gladiator, which is pretty famous. It's by Commodus. Gracchus, excuse me. I think he knows what Rome is. Rome is the mob. Conjure magic for them, and they'll be distracted. Take away their freedom, and still they'll roar. The beating heart of Rome is not the marble of the Senate, it's the sand of the Colosseum. He'll bring them death, and they will love him for it. Why that quote is so powerful and how it relates to this film, A Clockwork Orange, is what the remainder of this podcast will be about. At least on my end of the interpretation here. Effectively, this movie is a showcase of fascism. Fascism and the many different ways in which it manifests. Fascism and the ways in which it bleeds into society and literally steals the minds of every person. And what's so brilliant about the film, at least for me, was how the sense of looming dread and creepiness just never faded. Not for a single second was my hair not on end, and how it just mirrored our current society and the current problems that we're facing here in America. Let's start with the beginning scenes when we have these four individuals who, it's so symmetrical, as you put it, Zach, how there's these mannequins, and they're white, and I mean just pure white, and they have, milk coming out of their breasts, and how milk itself is used as a symbol of whiteness and white superiority, and how it just pans out with each mannequin being mirrored by another mannequin and the four gentlemen in the middle. And those mannequins all have different wigs, but the wigs, they are different colors, but they're all the same mannequin. So it's like this sameness, but hey, you have a different color, right? And each of those colors just bleeds into the rest of the movie, and it just shows how even individualism itself is used in a fascist regime. And I'm blown away by the genius of Kubrick and how he was able to really paint that and show exactly how that manifests in a fascist society, in a fascist regime. And it then transitions into thuggery, really, into a drunken fool on the ground singing his drunken tunes, and they come up to him with batons and sticks and they beat him. But before they do, the drunken fool says something so wise. He says that what kind of society can we live in when he is just suffering and he's wallowing in his own self-pity. And I just found that even the drunken fool has more wisdom than any fascist regime ever could. And that was so beautiful that Kubrick included that.
Absolutely. From the moment the film starts, you're completely struck by, first, the stylism, because you get the two title cards, and as you're saying, he's introducing the facile idea of different colors, implying some sort of individualistic component or quality, because you get the red title card, and then the blue title card, and then boom, we're at the milk bar. And this is definitely one of his best composed films. What it does do better than any of his other films, Eyes Wide Shut, Shining, any of them, is the symmetrical framing. There are glorious shots in this film, and every aspect of the frame is evenly balanced, I would say perfectly blocked. And it's just this very, very excellent. And you said it was completely disturbing. That disturbing appeal will never go away, because it's more than just science fiction or dystopian.
Oh, absolutely.
It's it's alien. It's alien, though intimate at the same time. Like, the best science fiction in the world is, it's just completely phenomenal.
Yeah.
And when you watch it for the first time as well, you don't know where your allegiance should be. You don't know if you should be on the side of your humble narrator or not. You really don't. I mean, there is actually no... the most noble figure is the one I've already mentioned, the drunk man on the side of the road who has possibly 5-6 minutes of screen time combined. So, but Malcolm McDowell really brought it. Obviously, this will be the role he'll be remembered for forever in a career full of interesting character roles. And he went through a lot for Kubrick, physically and mentally and emotionally, too, because during the making of the film, he and Kubrick were very close. That's what Kubrick does. When you're making a film with him, you're basically living with him. You are an extension of himself. Except when he's done making that film, he's never going to talk to you again, which is what happened to Malcolm McDowell as well. He completely, instantly cut him off. But also, Malcolm's one of the few actors who Kubrick ever let bring creative ideas to the table. He improvised on set, like during the practice of the Singing in the Rain scene. Malcolm McDowell just started doing that, and Kubrick thought it was great, was genius. He's like, I don't care, I'll pay for the rights. We're gonna film that. We're gonna do that. The only other two actors.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And Gene Kelly, of course, who made that song popular, hated that so much. Malcolm McDowell ended up meeting Gene Kelly later, and Gene looked at him with the highest amount of disgust that you could possibly imagine, because that song, it's a juxtaposition, because that song is about happiness and about like old Hollywood happiness, and Kubrick inverted that into something so disgusting and so post-ironic in the most ultra-violent way. Right. But the only other two actors Kubrick ever let improvise, apart from the "Here's Johnny" line that everyone knows. That's the only thing that Jack Nicholson improvised on The Shining. The only other two actors he let improvise heavily was Peter Sellers in Strangelove and Lolita, and R. Lee Ermey, who played the drill sergeant in Full Metal Jacket, because he couldn't get the authenticity down. But A Clockwork Orange is completely brilliant. And also, forewarning, we're not going to be talking about the Anthony Burgess novel. We do know that there are like several distinct differences. I have personally read the novel, but when Kubrick makes a film, the book no longer has any import. It doesn't have any importance anymore. That's what people miss when they call The Shining a poor adaptation of a Stephen King book. I would argue that the Stephen King book is just a poor representation of a greater art. So when Kubrick takes over your book, he's going to do something completely different with it. I mean, Doctor Strangelove is a black comedy, but the book itself is a political thriller. The book doesn't matter anymore. Kubrick makes this shit his own, so I'm sorry if you came to this as a fan of the book. We are not going to be talking about the book, about the changing to the ending, anything like that. We are talking about the film, and we're talking about Kubrick. But, David, what did you think was the most disturbing quality in this film?
Wow. I can easily answer that question. And the most disturbing quality is the amount of truth that is actually reflective in my current society and our current society, and how it just rings so true to just the different political ideologies and the landscape in general. Obviously, I'm not saying we're a fascist country or anything like that, but what I'm really saying is that it's just amazing. I mean, going back to that Gracchus quote, it's amazing how people, they just literally cheer for their own oppression. And I don't want to just immediately skip to the end. So instead, because I mean, the ending just really brings my point forward and all the way to home. But, you know, going into the next scene, you know, we see, like, you know, there was that thuggery of beating up that drunkard, but then they go immediately into fighting these vagabond soldiers who are trying to rape a woman. And so if you aren't paying attention, you think they are the good guys. Oh, they're stopping a rapist, right? But that's not the case at all. And that's what makes it so chilling. Literally chilling, because my hairs were standing on their ends the entire time. Because you see this reflective in society where people, you know, they're like trying to cheer for the good guy because, oh, well, the good guy is one who's going to stop a rapist, or they're going to try and, you know, stop violent crimes. But the way and the cruelty in which they do that is what should be focused on. And that's what Kubrick is trying to get at. Kubrick is trying to get at, if there was a just and good society, you know, even criminals are treated kindly, at least to a degree, because we recognize that we can become criminals and we should have at least prisoner rights, because that is the common good. That is the common public weal. That is what the founding fathers of America had envisioned, is that the rights weren't just for the great, but the citizens of America, but even for criminals, because, you know, we might become, you know, innocently accused.
Right.
Obviously, Alex is not innocent by any means, because he's unwittingly a pawn of fascism. And fascists, they want us to believe that violence is good. And that is said so many times in so many ways in this film.
Yes. And you can argue that each society fosters the criminals that that society deserves. And Alex DeLarge is is what that society has fostered and subsequently deserved. All right, so let's go act by act. Let me just know. Okay. Actually, you take this. You take this.
Yeah, so I wanted to keep going, if you don't mind.
I do not mind.
All right, thank you. It's just interesting how it just, like, it starts first with, I mean fascism, how it just first bleeds. It bleeds in a sort of social taboo, right? Because after the whole violence of stopping the rapist, it starts as like a thuggery, right?
Of course.
It starts as just like a brute savage having their way, doing what they want, being antisocial sociopaths, really, and going around and having their way with everyone and everything and getting whatever they want. You know, if it's women, if it's cars, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's all for them in their own pleasure and their own self-satisfaction. And that thuggery is reflected in Nazi Germany in the 1930s during the rise of Hitler, because Hitler would actually go to bars and he would stand amongst a drunken crowd of people and he would have speeches promoting thuggery, because he knew, just like fascists know, that their real and main focus is power and force.
I think fascism has, like you said, I'm going to use Malcolm McDowell, has an attractive archetype in a way. And I think that is perfectly described by the Minister of the Interior when he first meets Alex DeLarge. She says, he's enterprising, aggressive, outgoing, young, bold, vicious. And tell me that that's not like a spot-on description of some of the more shadowy figures in our political arena right now, or at least those trying to be prominent in it. And my God, that is the archetype for the attraction. That is fascism. But of course, Alex is fascism without the ideology. He is just the raw behavior of it, right?
And it just shows me how Kubrick is such a genius, because he knows all the different levels of fascism and the different scales in which they occupy the mind of people who believe in that sort of ideology. And you have an amazing point there. You absolutely do. And you brought up that the justice system of this fascist regime is the next showcase, right?
Yes.
Because they don't care about the criminals at all. All they care about is their end utopia, their end dream, right?
Yes.
Which is stopping criminality. And they don't care about the means. And that's why they first start with the social taboos of standing behind the white line and saying, yes, sir, at all times, and making sure to follow the rules. And then you're also stripped of your identity, and you're
really
giving the number
like
655321.
Yeah, that strange alien Kafkaesque quality of bureaucracy, of even when he's handing Alex over to the mental institution, like the guy has to sign in 6 different places, has to get the paper ripped off in 5. It's a 30-second exchange, because Kubrick is showing he always had a soft spot for darker slapstick humor, and he's not afraid to pull it awkwardly in this film, because it's alien still and it's never actually funny. It just adds to the subversive, disturbing nature of the whole piece.
Before you go forward, I would like to make a point. Build off really a point of what you just said.
Of course.
Right there in that scene where he's signing his life away, really. Alex is signing his life away. That is reflective of the terms of service and privacy policies that many people unwittingly here in capitalist America just unwittingly sign.
Don't read it, sign it.
Right, don't read it, sign it. And they make the clauses so enormous, as it's just the verbosity, the amount and the length is just overwhelming, and they want it to be overwhelming, at least those in the oligarchy, the wealthy elite, right? And they want you to just sign your life away. And, especially like arbitration, right? It's their own court, their own rules, their own justice system. Obviously, I'm not saying a wealthy elite, an aristocracy, or an oligarchy is fascism, but going to Plato's Republic, that is the very next step. It's oligarchy, it's wealthy elite, then it's, mob rule, and then once that mob rule happens, then the fascist regime's like, we need force, we need violence in order to stop this mob rule. Absolutely. And that's what's so chilling about that.
No such thing as a noble lie there.
Yeah.
They just figured out a way to normalize or monetize the viciousness or the ultra-violence of Alex. I don't know. Okay. So do you have a favorite sequence? Because I definitely do. Like a best put-together sequence.
Well, I want to hear yours first.
Mine is far and away when he first goes home and plays Beethoven and gets his snake and all of his stolen goods. But it's that close-up of the painting of the spread eagle naked woman with the snake around her vagina, and then as it goes down lower, it's almost like a oh my gosh, what chorus line of Jesus
Yeah.
figurines, and Kubrick cuts in such a brilliant way that it looks like they are just kicking and dancing to the music, like they're at Radio City Music Hall, and it's of course like this naked crown of thorns Christ just kicking and dancing to Beethoven while Alex is just orgasmically imagining it happen and watching it. It's amazing. It's like so the snake, the whole thing about temptation, or about the tree of knowledge. Alex is beyond that. It doesn't even matter. He just wants to watch things defile themselves.
Right.
To come to some sort of greater ecstasy for him. That's my favorite put together scene in the movie, because it is just taking an inanimate object and cutting it in such an amazing way that it takes on a new form.
Right. So my particularly favorite scene was probably, not halfway, a little more than halfway through the film, I predicted the ending. And I have
parts
never...
of that were telegraphed, though. But
yeah, sure. It was not obvious,
still a
but
difficult
it was
thing.
Subtle, and you could definitely follow the little.
And it was really
breadcrumbs.
if it ended like this, it would be brilliant. Not it would be this would be the most brilliant way to end it, as opposed.
And
to
then he did.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my favorite.
But he circumvents it a little bit.
Yeah, he definitely does. He definitely made me doubt myself, for sure. And that's, to me, a level of genius, is when someone can make me doubt myself despite the fact that I was dead on with the prediction.
Absolutely.
With that ending prediction. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. So back to my favorite scene. My favorite scene was probably the scene... Ooh, there are a few of them that were really good. Probably the scene where he is inside of the experiment room, and his eyes are just literally ripped open, and his eyes are open, and he's just being hypnotized. And that was just immediately after the scenes where he's trying to, Alex, is trying to reform himself in a Christian, a Catholic way. And it's amazing how fascism, even in Nazi Germany, did the same exact thing. And that's how I know Kubrick is an expert in what he's talking about.
Absolutely.
Because that's exactly what Hitler did. Hitler used religion for his fascist regime, and that was directly reflected not only in the symbolism of the Nazis, which were being flashed on the screen into Alex's mind, but also that was actually happening in Nazi Germany at the same time. Right. So there's this surreal connection with time happening here that it just blew my mind, just blew me away that he knew that, and he showed it perfectly.
And I almost got a little bit of Kubrick kind of saying that if you institutionalize or try to use religion as a cure to viciousness within fascism, then you make it worse. You make it 10 times worse. Because before it was like my favorite scene where these are at least plasticine figures. When he starts to read the Bible, he starts to literally imagine himself chastising Christ, and it just gets worse from there. Right. When he actually is introduced to religion in a real way, not in just I have a chorus line of Jesus dolls for some reason. Makes it even worse, even more incredible. Good Lord. What did you think of the music in the film? What did you think of the music? Yeah.
So Kubrick definitely knows how to, tug at your heartstrings and get you to feel a certain way. There are a lot of directors who are able to do that as well. Terrence Malick is another one. He knows exactly what musical score to get you to feel a certain way.
But Malick's is more subdued. This is Kubrick, loud.
Yes.
Never heard Beethoven so loud. So and also so aggressive, so deviant too. He made Beethoven sound a little lethal to me, a little dangerous, a little
right. And I think that's what's amazing about that, is that he knows that fascism doesn't care about what belief or identity or values that you have. Everything is used for the fascist regime, from Beethoven to Catholicism to personal identity to the most core of the human condition.
And of course, Beethoven's Ninth, which is known for joyful, joyful, we are joyful.
Right.
It's more, I wouldn't even, it's not a juxtaposition. It's almost like that's the fruit of the song itself. But talk about something else too.
So I wanted to move forward and talk about the really just the divulging scenes, because you see Alex, he's charged with all of these crimes, and if you're unwitting, if you're not paying attention, you want to pity him. You want to pity him.
You do, and I do too at certain times of the film. You have to.
If you have some humanness to you, you kind of do. You have to force yourself to admit, you don't want anyone to suffer such a cruel fate, right?
Of course.
So definitely a tragedy for sure. And I think what's reflective of that tragedy is that we see this in our society today. Not crazy, absurd like that.
It's a sneaky, duplicitous tragedy.
Yeah.
Maybe even Kubrick is saying, like, anything can pull on your heartstrings. Like, don't put too much value into that. Alex, he's been telling you this story, and he's not shameful at all.
Yeah.
But, like, emotions will be derived from anything. Maybe Kubrick's trying to teach us,
right?
Don't stop caring. Like, stop caring about this individual.
Yeah. And it's amazing how they turn the values that we like a republic, like the original United States and how it was founded. Obviously, we have a dark past, absolutely, and I'm not celebrating that dark past whatsoever. What I'm really trying to get at here is I'm trying to show how the values that we occupy, like liberty, is turned into authority, how justice is turned into brutality, and you see that reflected in police brutality today. And then you see other things like kindness should be viciousness, and how compassion should be what am I trying to say? Compliance, right? Absolutely. Compassion is compliance. And then you just see it. You see all of these values being turned on their head while he's being brainwashed. And then they finally get to the final core of our values, which is like integrity and loyalty. And the loyalty is to the state, and the loyalty is to the regime, and the loyalty is to the end goal and the final utopia of the fascist. And that is so terrifying.
That's probably the more terrifying aspect of the movie. The most disturbing scene for me is definitely the demonstration scene where they're showing to the public, to the media, to the politicians exactly how Alex is cured and how his behavior manifests when he's confronted with an aggressive or an erotic situation.
Right.
That is definitely the most disturbing part of the film. And I do want to just ask you about, what did you think of, it's actually probably Kubrick's most contrived film from an acting performance standpoint.
I can see that.
But he telegraphs that very early on, the scene where you're talking about where they prevent the rape from happening and have a little, like, warrior-esque brouhaha, a little scuffle. I mean, they're doing that on a stage. He sets it up on a stage, and he retracts the camera back, and you see it's on a stage, and he's telegraphing, like, and then that's really where they start to talk in their Burgess-esque made-up dialect of Vidiwell and Droogs, and like the old ultra-violence in and out.
And the alliterations.
So when he first truly introduces that language as a spoken force that you're going to have to deal with, he does that on a stage. So that he's showing you that he's aware that this is going to be a little contrived, it's going to be completely theatrical, but nonetheless alien, intimate, and I thought that was really good of him to do that. I thought it was a really inspired way to show to your audience, like, this is going to be a bit ostentatious, a little bit stagey. So I thought that was really smart of him in a very subtle way.
And, you made an excellent point that Kubrick himself thought the movie was a failure.
Yeah, just to
I wanted to
elaborate on that.
Yeah.
He didn't put it out believing it was a failure. I don't think he would have released or Kubrick was such a genius. He wouldn't have he wouldn't have focused his lens on anything without knowing exactly what he was trying to pull from it. what he was trying to intuit from his set of images. So when he released the film, I'm sure he thought it was fine. I'm sure he thought that his message was completely coherent, cohesive, and unbreakable. But the film itself spawned copycat crimes, including rapes, in Europe. So Kubrick, as a response to that, took a look at his film and decided it was a failure. He visually and very publicly disowned it, banned it from the UK. He took it off of the distribution. You couldn't see it in theaters anymore for quite a while, because that was the last thing Kubrick wanted you to get out of his film. We mentioned Malick earlier, and it's like, it's the equivalent of if someone watched The Thin Red Line and then met Terrence Malick and said, "Your film convinced me to sign up for the army." Like, oh, well, that's not what I wanted at all. So yeah. Kubrick accidentally spawned a subculture of people who are obsessed with this movie. Punk bands like the Addicts dress up like cosplay as these characters with songs like Smart Alex and like, Viva la Revolution. Like they really connected with these characters at the behest, like, contrary to what Kubrick wanted. And right. I honestly don't get how they got that. Unless they're just, like, the original edgelords. Like, I don't know.
OG edgelords.
Like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could think that Alex's story is one of triumph, or, like, one of, like, pure triumph. It's an ironic triumph.
Hopefully I can shed some light as to exactly how that thinking happens. I'm very fortunate to see so many different political narratives unfolding before my eyes as I just, live my daily life here in America. And I see, the different ways in which different, crowds of people, Nietzsche said it best, the crowd is untruth. And I see these crowds of people professing different untruths. So how I can see how someone might unwittingly get the wrong message from A Clockwork Orange is that, the tragedy of someone trying to just have some fun, and then that fun is then turned into this sort of terror, and then that terror is then transformed into this government regime which wants to use you in every single way. And so the only way that you can escape from that government regime is to really just violently be as rebellious as possible. Rebellion for rebellion's sake, violent for violence sake, and authority for the sake of authority.
It's like you said at the beginning about like the facile idea about individualism within this film. People wrongly conflated rebellion with individualism.
Exactly.
They saw Alex as an individual, but that would have to mean that they completely disregarded the fact that he dresses just like the other droogs, and that the films that he had to watch during the brainwashing process featured droogs who were dressed just like him. Like, he is not special.
That's a good point.
But they overlooked that, or saw some sort of disparate camaraderie there.
I think what I'm really trying to get at here is that the people those individuals who committed those acts of violence and crime, who were inspired by A Clockwork Orange and then went out and overtly said they were inspired by A Clockwork Orange. So this is not like unknown. It's not an unknown thing, right? They went out and they publicly said that. But I think how they came to that conclusion is that they didn't want, those people in particular didn't want to suffer the same fate, because they thought along the same lines, right? And they thought, I should be able to do whatever I want in a free society, right? So I should be able to go out and drink as much alcohol as I want. Well, milk. I should go out and I should be able to have sex with as many women as I want, or as many men as I want, or whatever, these people thought. And the fact that the fascist regime or the government, right, is taking all of those things away from the person. Those are the supposed liberties, right? At least to that particular person's perspective. I don't consider those liberties. I consider those crimes, right?
Right.
Because it hurts other people. Like, come on. I have compassion. I care about the well-being of America. I care about the public good, right? But the way the fascist regime here in this particular movie uses that, right, is they say, you know, you should care about the public good, but only in our way, right? And so that is like a sort of uncreativity. It's a complete stagnation. And not only is that stagnation a part of the problem, but there's like many different layers as to why that's such a wrong-headed approach. And that manifests throughout the entire movie, and Kubrick just goes about showing those many different layers of how they're mistaken. So what I find interesting is in the unfolding scenes after Alex is brainwashed, you see that he's pitiable, he's pliable, he's like sheet metal, and you can bend and shape him in any way. And so I think the people who did commit those crimes, who were inspired by A Clockwork Orange to do those horrible acts, they didn't want that. They didn't want to be pliable and malleable. They wanted to be themselves. They wanted to be their own identity, and unwittingly, just like Alex, they contributed to the fascist regime.
Well, absolutely. And also, we can't disregard, might even be giving some of these people too much credit. Some people are just dim. Sorry for the pun. I realize it's a character in A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Some people are just dim and just looking for some sort of confirmation bias to their own evil wickedness. I mean, God, maybe they just stopped watching halfway through and just thought the first half of it was just wonderful, brilliant anarchy, joy. But, you know, I'm reminded of how disgusted Kurt Cobain was when he found out that a woman was raped while people were singing Polly Want a Cracker to her.
Oh,
like,
that's terrible to hear. I didn't know that.
You can't hold any artist accountable for that. So I don't think it was a failure. I think Kubrick's film was just...
I don't think it was either.
Was just inflammable, a bit subversive, and I guess, like The Dark Knight, dangerous in the wrong hands. Someone watches it with a certain imbalance in their brain, certain tendencies for evil, capacities for wickedness, and that's exactly what unfolds. I think it was a massive success. I do understand Kubrick. It was his humanist qualities couldn't allow it to be on the market if he knew that there are at least people out there who are taking really sick message from it and acting it out in public. And Kubrick's film, this is just a wonderful film. Yeah, it's a absolutely brilliant, 100%.
Yeah, if I hadn't read Plato's Republic, I think to some degree I would have not understood Kubrick's message just a little more clearly because of the transition and how government is corrupted slowly and surely over time, and how bureaucratic processes, you know, politics are meant to slow down that corruption as much as possible. And it's just shown. It's shown
so
over
why
and
do you
over.
think Kubrick chose the character of the victims for Alex? Why was it an author of subversive anti-government political literature and his wife, and him being forced to watch his wife be defiled, and a woman, obviously affluent woman with a bunch of cats around, who is crushed by a phallic, not even...
Yeah,
phallic is too nice. It's just it's just a vase, a statue.
I see where you're going. Yeah.
Why did he choose those two as his victims?
So this is pretty interesting. I know from studying Nazi Germany and World War II lore that fascist regimes, particularly Hitler's fascist regime, not even Hitler, because Hitler was kind of like a more minor role than people put him out to be. Himmler was way worse. And they would use masculinity. And that's why the phallic symbols were there, because the fascist regime knows that people have an identity, a bonding to masculinity. And, you know, I have a bond to my own masculinity as a man. At the same time, my masculinity isn't overtly violent and vicious like that. My masculinity is more about, you know, courage and bravery and integrity and trying to promote freedom and liberties for other people, Whereas in this particular movie, A Clockwork Orange, the masculinity is used in the fascist regime and for the fascist regime's utopia. It's used to crush femininity. It's used to divide and conquer. And that's why the particular giant penis is crushed onto that woman's head, because it's a literal metaphor of divide and conquer, because it's splitting the woman's head in half.
Nailed it. That's pretty good. Absolutely agree with it. Let's see, what else we got? You got something?
Yeah, and I wanted to go forward with that because, even femininity is used in a fascist regime. So there's some great aspects to femininity and masculinity, but there are also the fact that the fascist regime tries to bastardize those things as much as possible. And, femininity in those particular cases, like, oh, the caring mother who's, administering the cute little drug to the Alex. Oh, poor Alex, this is for your own good. But then it's used in such an ugly and cruel way to brainwash him completely and utterly.
Absolutely.
All right, so I wanted to just jump and dive board off of a fake Hitler quote, because this is a common misconception that a lot of people have. It's the quote, I took a little bit of people's freedom, but then the freedom of the press must be taken all at once. That's kind of paraphrasing it. Well, I do not support Nazism in any way. I do not like it. I think it's wrong in almost every sense of the word.
We shouldn't have to say that.
Wrong is, obviously that should be without saying. But it's more like fascism takes liberties very rapidly. And that is the nature of fascism, as it tries to take and centralize and control power as much as possible. And we see these freedoms being eroded little by little in our society because of the success of the American Republic and the beliefs that the American public have in the real integrity that Americans have for liberties. And I find that such a beautiful and refreshing thing about being American, the rebelliousness and the rebellious attitude for the sake of liberty and freedom. I think that is just wonderful. And we see this in A Clockwork Orange. We see that liberties are literally just robbed left and right. You see that his room is just literally, him being Alex, his room and all of his belongings are just literally ripped from him almost immediately after he goes to jail. Like I said, only
his
in a
parents
few
get a
short
new
months.
son.
Yeah, his parents got a new son,
which is
too.
hilarious.
Yeah, and obviously, someone who's not paying attention, they'll pity that. But what Kubrick is really trying to say is that is the nature of fascism, and you can see that is when it bleeds so much that it's literally ripping away all your private property, your personal belongings, your freedom, your identity, your individualism, and even collectivism for society is also being shattered completely, so that way the fascist regime can take control. And that's happening all within the course of 2 years did that happen? Yeah, more or less. And that is scary. And so that's a very big warning sign. So thankfully, we have a lot of checks and balances in our country to prevent that from happening. Here in A Clockwork Orange, however, we're seeing that happening very rapidly.
I completely agree. What do you think the title of the film meant for Kubrick, A Clockwork Orange, having to do with the brain? A brain on fire?
Orange, that is true. Orange is associated with sun and fire.
Clockwork is your brain, right?
Clockwork Orange, yeah. Enlightenment away from fascism, maybe? Or maybe the opposite? Or
I think it's the opposite. I think it's not satirical. I think it's a little wry kind of name, like a little not duplicitous, but a little like he's grinning. A good little name there.
Yeah, I can see that. That's definitely more accurate to say. So you probably have that put better than I do. So put together.
What do you think Kubrick's goal was with A Clockwork Orange? If you could condense the message that he was trying to convey into just a few sentences, essentially, what do you think he wanted his audience to gain from the film, from experiencing it?
Great question. I would have to say the final takeaway and the overall message he's trying to do is to promote peace and liberty, and to do that in a very peaceful and compassionate way. And how all of the mistakes of violence, of violent ways, of violent means always bring violent ends. And I would say that is the real big takeaway, at least for me, on what I see A Clockwork Orange trying to represent. Or not even trying, it does it incredibly well.
Yeah.
And I see that.
What do you think his thoughts on human nature are from this film in particular? Do you think he thinks that it is unchangeable, or is it learned, or is it just...
I think it's learned, yeah. I mean, definitely, because, I mean, like, look at the brainwashing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that was very overt. I don't think he has, like, the sort of the Thomas Hobbes view of the pessimistic, cynical, of humanity can't be saved kind of thing. Maybe he's more of a Jacques Rousseau, sort of the social contract.
I actually think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. I think he's more going along those lines of, violence is taught. A lot of people will say that, violence is inherent in people. At the same time, there's a lot of evidence which just completely contradicts that. Not just through evolutionary biology and science, but also in, like, art. Like, you see a lot of art that's just so peaceful and wonderful. And then there's, like, a really famous picture of a female, and the flower power kind of thing, where she has a beautiful flower, and then there's these riot police directly in front of her, and she's slowly handing a flower over to the riot police guy.
Yeah.
And he's smiling. You know what I mean?
What overall feelings did Kubrick conjure from you? What was there a consistent one?
Oh, well, in this particular movie, two feelings really popped out to me. Was it's not even uneasiness, but the like a kind of like a terrifying dread of possibilities if we don't stand up.
Certainly helps that.
Yeah, if we don't stand up and we don't
synth.
Yeah, if we don't stand up and say, as a giant crowd, we want peace, right? It's gonna, I think it was one of the famous founding fathers made a famous statement. They said, I think it was George Washington. Those who secure liberty at those who want security at the sacrifice of liberty deserve neither security or liberty.
That was Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, yeah. Benjamin Franklin. I'm so sorry.
He was good for nothing but good quotes.
Right. So yeah, Benjamin Franklin. Excuse me. Sorry about that. But yeah, just like that's just one thing. But there are a lot of other things that just go along those same lines.
Absolutely. Where do you think...
Other quotes.
What do you think of this film's mammoth importance and influence? Where do you think this rests in the history, in film history? Because it is one of the most important ones of the modern era.
Could you repeat?
Sure. What do you think of... where do you think this movie sits in film history? What kind of space do you believe that it occupies? Because it's a very different one than, say, even Kubrick's own films. 2001 would be in a completely different regard than this one. Very true. This is almost kind of the patron saint of deviant cinema, but it's highly moralistic in my eyes.
And that brings me to my second feeling, which was I had a sort of like real deep and inner rage, which was as a result of, my rebellious nature as a person, because I really love championing the human spirit, and the human spirit here being, like the human condition of wanting to be who you really want to define yourself to be. You can be whoever you want.
And Alex does go on a Campbell-esque hero's journey, and I mean...
Yeah.
And in a way, he's forced to... Well, not in a way. He is forced to not be the person who he is and wants to be.
Right. And I think that's where a lot of those people from the UK who did those crimes took the mistake the wrong way. They took the rebelliousness and put it into violence rather than taking it in an avant-garde way and really being radical and peaceful about it. Right?
Kubrick was a premier filmmaker, and he was putting out an avant-garde, very deviant film for the masses.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think, you see that. You see how violence brings so much suffering and how peace and compassion are a cure to that suffering. But the fascist regime doesn't want you to think that. They don't want you to know that truth. Instead, they want you to see and believe in their particular utopian vision.
Dissociative to begin with. And
right.
Kubrick occupies probably the most elite space in my mind of brilliant filmmakers, which was populated only by Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, and Orson Welles as being just... if people were born for celluloid, born to make films, it was those three people. They may not have made my favorite movies in the world, but they certainly made movies what they are.
Yeah. And then
the architects of the art.
Kubrick is so potent in his message because he not only understands the identities and the beliefs and values that people occupy, but he has an intimate connection and understanding of the human condition.
He really does. And I always find myself mystified because anyone who knows anything about Kubrick knows how much work and effort and study and time and planning that he put into his films. I mean, on Barry Lyndon, I'm pretty sure he took 3,000 different takes of the same shot.
Wow.
Because there was just something that he wasn't able to capture in that one shot. And I always think about how his dream project was always to make a Napoleon film. And he wanted to do that since before 2001. So he had a whole room, library of his house, dedicated to this Napoleon project that he never made. It never came to fruition because he could never get the actual message of what he was trying to produce. He was never able to articulate it even to himself on paper and storyboards or in his mind. And he spent his entire life trying to do that movie. And so I always find it so fun. I think that we really did crack open A Clockwork Orange. I think Clockwork Orange might be... No, it's still a super challenging movie, but I don't think anyone will ever fully comprehend a Kubrick movie. I know I'm adding a mythos or a grandeur to Kubrick that maybe he doesn't completely deserve, but I think he's earned that because there's 1,000 different interpretations of every one of his films post 2001.
Yeah, and you see in one of the scenes in A Clockwork Orange in 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, the vinyl record there in the center.
That was pretty cool. So
almost like this is the apex of human evolution if we continue on this line. Since 2001 was nothing if not a film about evolutionary psychology.
So I mean, getting really into the how that fascism bleeds. I mean, I know I've probably said that word probably 4,900 times. I mean,
fascism is the best. I mean, most useful lens to view A Clockwork Orange through. I think it's the one that has the most fruit at the end of it.
And you can see that Kubrick even uses archetypes to show how that kind of authoritarian attitude bleeds into even the writer, which is the guy whose wife was murdered by Alex.
Absolutely.
Right? And you see that the writer, he literally says the word totalitarianism in that phone conversation before Alex is trapped in that room where he's basically being tortured with Beethoven's Ninth. But you see that he's talking and rallying against totalitarianism, but then he himself has this sort of brutality to him.
Because the intellectuals are just vengeful in the end. And just
Sad.
as impulsive and cruel. Try the wine. I love that part. But the political philosophy is the best framework to use to dissect The Clockwork Orange, most definitely. And I love it because it is a timeless message, too. You don't have to have a learned knowledge of late 60s, early 70s the political atmosphere of that time. You can easily apply it to or transfer it over to any age. And I think it has the same powerful message, but it's a bit more powerful in the current state of affairs worldwide right now with the rise of a new, hip, young, enterprising, good-looking, vicious new fascism.
Ooh, scary. So it's interesting here in A Clockwork Orange, we do see that. We do see that vicious, young brutality, right? And reflected in Alex. And how Kubrick knows that there are like the human conditions like hope and despair and suffering and freedom, which are being subverted and destroyed and then replaced with their own version of those things, right? So we see like hope is turned into this sort of vicious hope, and this despair is turned into, if you don't accept our fascism, then this despair will happen to you. And then you see the same thing with suffering. You know, suffering is such a beautiful thing, and in a certain way, suffering helps us to learn and grow and to really get more compassion, but instead the suffering is used to make more violence. And then you see that more and more. You see the freedoms being eroded and then replaced with their version of what is free.
Absolutely.
So it's all about control.
And it would be preposterous of us. I praised him a little bit earlier, but we do have to talk about one of the most significantly iconic performances in all of art house cinema. What did you think of Malcolm McDowell, of the performance he gave as Alex? What did you think of it?
I mean, chilling, haunting, terrifying, and oh man, there's just so many different words that come to mind, feelings that are evoked by how Malcolm McDowell just embodies that fascism so well. And he does it. Malcolm McDowell is, to me, a showcase of that evolution of authoritarianism. And it just starts in the most simple and savage way, and then it develops into this religious way, and then it develops into this political way, and then to this justice lens, and then it moves and it just finally represents into a spectacular image of him being the poster child of what is the utopian dream. And you see that right at the very end. You see all of the media and the press coming in all at once, taking his picture, and he's just lying on his bed, and he's cured because science cured him, and the newspaper reels all reflect that sentiment.
Brilliant finale.
And then he's so pitiable because he has all of these wrappings all around his body, and he suffered so much. It was such a torturous and cruel fate, and that should be pitied and should always be avoided at all costs. And the only solution to the fascist is their regime. And that is what I think Malcolm McDowell knew and tried to embody.
Saw something in his blue eyes, in his spaced out, demonic look, and it translated wonderfully. Kubrick knew exactly. He was a painting. He was his prop. He was the face of young fascism. It was perfect. Perfect. Any closing thoughts?
I mean, I've said way too much, I feel like, but I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about this. And I really do appreciate any audience listening in on this. If you've gone this far, you know, we're about like 58, 59 minutes in. And if you're really following along and you're really listening to this and you're learning a lot from this, because I know I learned quite a lot in just this 90-minute film, and how revealing it is, and how that exposure, not just the film exposures and the different shots and the angles and the juxtapositions and the symmetry, but also in my own reflective mind and the different cruelties I had when I was younger, and how I learned to become more temperate and more moderate and more peaceful and loving.
Mhm.
And I think Kubrick was really trying to get that message across really well.
I think he succeeded,
Yeah.
even if he doesn't believe that he did. I think it's
And yeah,
easily one of his best films, if
And-
not his very best.
and I want to just thank anyone listening.
'Cause I think the message is the most
Yeah.
coherent as well. Not that his other films are convoluted or jumbled. It's just that I think that the inner dynamics of like the true message of this film actually comes across in all of its wonderful colors. And the colors in this film, holy shit! I'm sorry, they're a tour de force of just amazing colors.
Gold and red and yeah.
Oh my god! Probably his best use of colors are in this film and possibly Eyes Wide Shut. But this film is just eye popping. It's gorgeous to look at. But yeah. Clockwork Orange, I'm very happy we finally got the big kahuna, Kubrick, and subscribe, like, share this video, and thanks for watching, and thanks for listening to it.